In this episode of American Greed, when COVID first hits, the U.S. government opens the money spigot.
Today, I'll sign the single biggest economic relief package in American history.
But that package leads to what is quite possibly the largest fraud in American history.
Estimates start around $100 billion.
A staggering amount of COVID relief money disappears into the hands of criminals.
The fraudsters are bold, buying luxury cars, flights on private jets, mansions.
And in the crowd of crooks, one swindler stands out. Richard Avazian runs a family fraud factory designed to steal millions in COVID cash to spend on houses, watches, and gold.
You know, in a crisis, most of us turn to each other, and there are some of us that turn on each other.
It was cruel to their fellow Americans, people who actually needed that money to survive.
American Greed goes inside the assembly line of fraud, inside the Avazians' mansion.
It was what they called at trial their dream house.
Inside their private conversations.
She's not saying that because mom and dad are coming over for dinner. There's an intent behind that.
And inside the decision to leave their children and run.
Richard tries to justify it as if he had no choice, but he had a choice. They chose to commit fraud. They chose to steal money.
And they choose their place on the FBI's notorious list. Most wanted.
Tonight, over 16,000 now dead across America. New York alone with more cases than any country in the world.
Looking back to the spring of 2020 is painful. We are just discovering what COVID-19 can mean. Hospitals are overflowing. ICUs are running out of ventilators. More than 100,000 Americans have died. Entire cities are shut down. Tens of millions of Americans are suddenly without work. And for some, that spells opportunity. In Tarzana, California, in his $3 million mansion, Richard Avazian is thrilled with the COVID cash he is raking in. He sends a text to his sister-in-law, Tammy Dadjian. Babe, I got the funds. I just checked the accounts. Already a convicted felon, Richard is leading his family on a criminal joyride. How much they send you, Tammy asks. Like over 500 so far. It will later become clear that Richard is firmly dedicated to one principle. You will never be caught. Richard Avazian's story begins in Yerevan, Armenia, at a time when the Soviets still ruled. When he is 10 years old, his mother brings Richard and his brother to America to start a new life, leaving behind his abusive father. They set up life in the Los Angeles area, where for years Armenian immigrants find a welcoming landing spot.
When he came over to the United States, he did not speak any English. He started in the 5th grade, and he learned how to assimilate into the United States culture, and he loved it.
And in the country he loves, he finds the love of his life. Her name is Marietta Tarabellian. They are married in 2004 and have 2 sons and a daughter.
One of the things that he said is that he really wanted to be the father that he never had. He wanted to be the father that was going to be there, be a provider, and be a role model for his children.
Yes, he will be a role model. A role model for turning a crisis into a chance to steal. In 2007, Richard Avazian's cunning business strategy starts to become clear. He is working in real estate. At the time, easy-to-get subprime mortgages are flooding the country.
So Richard sees an opportunity. He knows the real estate market. He knows how to work the system in order to get the money out of it.
It is time to try his hand at bank fraud. He knows many banks are not verifying income, and so on an application for a home equity line of credit, he gives his a boost from $6,000 a month up to $44,000. Bingo. The loan is approved. Richard gets $500,000. And so next, Marietta gets in on the game.
This time, they use her as the borrower, and she inflates her income, and at the time she was making 0 to none. And using the false W-2s and the false tax returns, she gets over $1 million, just like that.
But unfortunately for them, the couple that steals together gets indicted together on charges of bank fraud. 5 months later, Richard and Marietta plead guilty. And Richard writes to the sentencing judge asking to avoid jail time. He says that he is most afraid of being separated from his family, the most important people in my life. I will never in the future do anything to cause them pain. It works. The judge believes him.
And the court took a flyer on him and said, okay, I'm going to make you do community service. I won't take you from your family, and I hope you learn from this.
But the lesson Richard and Marietta learn, crime pays. Eight years after their felony convictions, Richard and Marietta are living in a multi-million-dollar house in Encino. Presumably, they can afford it because Richard is a success, working in a number of seemingly legitimate businesses.
Richard Avazian presented himself to the world as a serial entrepreneur and angel investor who was interested primarily in the tech industry.
But appearances can be deceiving. Evidence shows that despite their previous convictions, Richard and Marietta actually expand and refine their mortgage fraud operation.
They had essentially a well-oiled machine to commit fraud. We call it the assembly line of fraud.
That assembly line is comprised of a huge array of stolen identities, falsified documents, and bank accounts created for one purpose: to steal millions of dollars in loans they never intend to pay back. Just a few blocks away are their co-conspirators, Richard's brother Artur and his sister-in-law Tammy Dadian. This is a criminal enterprise that is all in the family.
Not only do they have the relationships that most American families have with their spouses or with their brothers or sisters or brother and sister-in-laws, but here they're all partners in crime. And this was a family business, and that business was fraud.
And their best business opportunity is about to fall into their laps. Up next, Richard cracks the code to unlock COVID cash.
To them, it was a game. How much could they take, and how fast could they get it?
Later, with the FBI at the door, what is Marietta hiding? By all appearances, Richard Avazian lives by the motto, "In every crisis lies criminal opportunity." And in 2020, that cynical view pits him against small business owners across the country who are finally back on their feet following the Great Recession.
Before the pandemic, we were making a lot of progress.
Marquise Harris Dawson represents South LA in the Los Angeles City Council.
Certainly we had problems that any low-income community of color in this country has, but we were making progress.
Take, for example, this small restaurant, Medeers. For 18 years, owner Kerry Reese serves Southern-style food, grits, and oxtails to loyal customers.
We did very well. 2019 was one of our biggest years, and I was very encouraged. Each day was becoming a better day.
That is, until COVID-19 arrives.
As the crisis sweeps the nation, the toll is growing by the hour.
Another 2,000 lives lost nationally since yesterday as this wildfire of misery burns across the country.
I'm very scared that if this doesn't stop soon, we're going to end up with a much bigger problem.
And California becomes the first state to issue a stay-at-home order.
That directive goes into force and effect this evening, and we are confident that the people of the state of California will abide by it.
For businesses everywhere, the news is alarming, frightening. At Medeers, it feels like a gut punch.
I furloughed 50% of my staff at that point. because I didn't know how long that the full-on closure was going to last. And I didn't have the kind of backup funds to continue to pay people and there's no money coming in.
And then in March, a lifeline is thrown out.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak.
President Trump announces that he is authorizing billions of dollars for COVID relief. For struggling businesses across the country, it offers a chance to survive. But up in Encino, for the Avazian family, with an impressive track record of milking a crisis, the global pandemic is the opportunity of a lifetime. Immediately, Richard texts Tammy Dadian, his sister-in-law. Did you hear Trump today? He's passing a bill to give small businesses $80 billion. Tammy responds, we can totally do this. She understands immediately that it is time to pivot from mortgage fraud to what will be the next hot crime, COVID fraud. 2 weeks later, when Congress passes the $2.2 trillion CARES Act, it's clear the potential is huge. $669 billion in loans for the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, and $20 billion for Economic Injury Disaster Loans, EIDL. Because the relief money needs to get out the door fast, the approval process is deliberately easy.
The Small Business Administration, in sending that money out, largely relied on an honor system. They basically said to people, apply and sign and tell us that you're really entitled to the money.
That is an open invitation to someone like Richard Avazian. He gets to work right away. He tells Tammy, this program is over by the end of the month, so get as much as you can.
Knowing that doors were closing on them, knowing that the program was not going to last forever, if they were going to fulfill their criminal dreams, they'd have to move quickly and move broadly, and they did just that.
Early on, Richard learns that the EIDL program issues a $10,000 cash advance. Richard texts Tammy, if you don't qualify for loan, you keep the $10K. She's on it. Okay, so let's do for all this idiots. 10K is 10K, she answers. Those idiots are a cast of characters the Avazians have assembled to front their fraud. Many are actual legitimate businesses whose identity they steal outright. Others are synthetic identities.
When I say synthetic, I mean not just a completely 100% fake identity, but an identity that is made up of fake parts and real parts, which is particularly dangerous because there are parts that can be verified, and yet it's not a real identity.
Like this person, Yulia Zadko. She comes to the United States from Ukraine on a student visa and gets a social security number. But she stays for just 4 months and never comes back. There is little risk that she will learn her name is used over and over to steal from the U.S. government.
We think that they knew her, and that when she left, they took that identity that she had and used it to commit fraud. And not only did they use it to commit fraud, they turned her into a man.
And soon, Yulia Zadko, the man, wins approval for COVID relief money for a number of businesses. Top quality contracting, Timeline Transport, Touring Info Solutions. Total take for that one idiot, $1.2 million. And right behind Zadko is another student, Victoria Kashko, also from Ukraine. She too is a versatile business person, the owner of Journeyman Construction and Runyon Tax Service and Fiber One Media. Many of the identities are holdovers from previous loan frauds. Already bank accounts, even websites are in place.
They're primed. They literally are set up to roll out as many loan applications as possible.
And that is just what they do. In the first month, they seek approval on 43 loans, attempting to rake in more than $5 million. Richard texts, I did 2 yesterday and got doxed today. One of them already funded in the account. It's crazy.
They're literally laughing about it because to them it's free money, when in reality this was supposed to be money to keep people off the street.
And it is money that may soon run out. With the pressure on, Richard and Tammy are in constant minute-by-minute touch in their typo-laden text messages.
Tamara clearly respects Richard. She clearly looks to him for guidance.
At one point, Tammy asks Richard, how many times can people apple for the sister relief? He knows exactly what she is asking.
She was, in many ways, his second lieutenant.
And he repeatedly makes it clear he is in charge. At one point he asks, who told you to do those numbers? Tammy answers, me, myself, LOL. Richard snaps back, no, I told you, I have the freaking formula. Hello? He does have the formula, and his ability to game the system even impresses investigators.
What impressed me the most was their savviness to understand that the EIN was the key in this process.
EIN, Employee Identification Number. That's the one number the program computers check to make sure an application is not a duplicate. Richard figures it out. He tells Tammy, go to bluevine.com right now and apply. They are approving and closing within 24 hours. Tammy, with same info? Yeah, just change your EIN by one number. They don't check for Tam. It's all automated.
So they were able to apply for multiple loans using the same company name, but simply varying the tax identification number, oftentimes by just one digit.
As their strategies pay off, Richard and Tammy are both working through the night. Richard, I didn't sleep all night. I was working 24 hours straight. Tammy, I applied at 3 a.m. for my B of A and Wells. LOL.
Their greed was unbridled, and it was cruel to their fellow Americans. People who actually needed that money to survive were, in their mind, competitors. People that they were racing against to try to get as much money as they possibly could so that they could keep it for themselves.
And while Richard and Tammy celebrate their victories, their competitors, small business owners, are losing the game. Carrie Reese gets money for COVID relief, but it is not enough to pay her bills, and so she applies again.
I didn't get that because they said the money had already been depleted.
And the stress becomes intolerable.
The most precarious situation was all of the pre-designated payments that were coming through. And there was no money to cover them. And so then you get into this spiral of overdraft fees or return check fees. And it was just, I was like, stop, please, just stop.
And the future? Bleak.
I saw my retirement dreams just melt away. And it's like, what do I do now?
Meanwhile, Richard writes Tammy, I got the keys today on the house. Apparently, his lifestyle is in for a major upgrade. Up next, the shocking exploitation of a death in the family. There is little point in staying up all night to steal millions of dollars if one cannot truly enjoy the rewards of stolen money. And so, in June 2020, Richard and Marietta do just that. They move into their new Tuscan-style villa in Tarzana. The price tag? More than $3 million.
It was what they called at trial their dream house.
It's a big moment for the Avazian family. Tammy texts Richard, I love you, my big brother, and truly happy for you for this new achievement in your life. She adds, anyone of the looser who have their eye on you.
You know, people like us, the government.
Richard answers as if he is accepting an award for Businessman of the Year. Thanks. It's not just me. Trust me, you, Art, everyone I care about plays a big role in my life that drives me to achieve. It's a telling line. It shows that Richard is proud of his criminal accomplishments. They are a measure of his success as the leader of the family business.
The family business is whatever it takes to keep the money, to keep the lavish lifestyle, the houses that they're used to. It's not about being a good father or a good role model or following the rules. It's about a result. It doesn't matter how you get there.
And as the COVID money pours in, Richard is making enormous investments in watches. Very expensive watches.
He needed someplace to park his money because he can't take stolen money and just go down to the bank and deposit it in his savings account. He's got to put it somewhere. And these watches are a way to do that.
He and his watch dealer shoot photos back and forth via text message. Richard says, "Get me a price on these." And when the dealer suggests a watch costing $130,000, Richard gives a thumbs up. And why not? The flow of money is fast and steady. Signed today, Richard says. Tammy, LOL.
To them, it was a game. And how much could they take? And how fast could they get it?
And they are always on the lookout for a new identity to steal. In July, they break ground on a new opportunity. It's a particularly grim opportunity.
In July 2020, Marietta Tarabellian's father died. Within 3 days, Richard Avazian opened bank accounts in his name and began applying for pandemic relief funds using his name and using a company called Mod Interiors.
The dead man's take, $534,000.
It's a pretty blatant example of how far they were willing to go to steal more money in this case, is to take their dead relative's name 3 days after they pass away, when normal people would be grieving, and they were using that name to steal money.
And shortly after the COVID relief money hits the bank, his daughter, a.k.a. Victoria Kaichko, spends that money on furniture and jewelry. Lots of jewelry. $60,000 here, $62,000 there, cash courtesy of the Paycheck Protection Program.
And it kind of gives you an insight into the mentality of these fraudsters, which is my needs are more important. My wants are more important. My dream house is more important. My AP watch, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, that is more important than the businesses going out of business and the homeless that are gathering outside of the lakes and the streets of LA.
And for business owners across LA and their employees, it is getting rough out there. In this year, 7,500 Los Angeles County businesses permanently close, more than in any other U.S. city. And many are just barely hanging on, like 3rd Street Dance in Los Angeles. For 40 years, it is a beloved fixture in the community, now owned by Leslie Ferreira.
This place has been around forever, and people don't just come here to dance. People come here to have friendships, to become part of a community.
But when COVID shuts her down, Leslie joins thousands of other business owners scrambling for money.
I absolutely was afraid, 100%. I mean, I don't think any small business owner out there wasn't afraid of pandemic.
To keep her business alive, she begins holding classes outside in the parking lot. And she gets a PPP loan. It covers expenses for 1 month. When she is eligible for a second, she learns the government funding has run out. And so, with no other choice, she starts to go through her personal savings.
No one wants to be going into their personal savings to be paying for their business. But I also knew that I had to get through it.
She does get through it. And later, she is stunned to learn about the fraudsters living just a few miles away.
I'm sure they went by tons of businesses and drove by and just saw sign after sign of closing and for lease because people went under, and they just continued to do that. It's really upsetting, yeah.
She's right. Richard Avazian is out driving. He has a watch to pick up. Up next, Richard has no idea, but the FBI is watching.
This car shows up, and it's a Mercedes G-Class SUV. And you see this person get out.
In Palm Desert, 150 miles east of the Avazian fraud factory, Donald Sabala runs a small construction company. For 40 years, he makes a good living. He has a great credit score, no debt, no complaints from customers. And that makes him a sitting duck for the fraud family. His first clue comes in 2019 when his mail is mysteriously redirected to an unknown address.
I got a late payment on one of my bills, and then I got another one, and I couldn't figure it out.
And then it gets worse. He is threatened and accused of things he has nothing to do with.
We started getting calls that people wanted to sue us because we were putting liens on their houses and taking out loans that we didn't take out.
In time, he learns, like dozens of other honest business owners, he is just a tool in the assembly line of fraud. The Avazians entangle him in an unknown number of schemes and at least 3 loans for COVID relief for a total take of $445,000.
All I know is they just tried to steal everything they could from me and from the government.
Meanwhile, Richard warns Tammy, I got rid of everything on Sabala. The reason? Sabala put out a fraud alert and knows something is going on. In fact, at this point, a lot of people know something is going on, including the major fraud unit at the Department of Justice.
In June 2020, we received a tip that there was a possible loan fraud ring involving about 17 different loans at the time.
Very quickly, 2 names stand out, Yulia Zatko and Victoria Kashko.
We know all of these loans are fraudulent. Big question is, who's really behind it? Who's driving the boat?
One legitimate company Victoria Kashko claims to own is Runyon Tax Service. And so, IRS criminal investigator Jeffrey Clark heads out to the address listed on the application. It's an outdoor furniture store.
This is a good representation of many of the other locations I went to also. Most of them were other businesses. They were vacant office buildings. The businesses weren't at the locations, and had never been. It's just false, 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 false. There's nothing true on the applications.
And so the investigators take the most promising route. They follow the money. They see that Yulia Zatko's company, Timeline Transport, deposits $149,000 into an account at Radius Bank.
We look at the bank account, we see the $149,000 come in. I saw $100,000 being wired out almost immediately, like within a day or two, to an escrow company.
The escrow company explains the money is for the purchase of a house.
Purchase of a house in whose names? Richard Avazian and Marietta Tarabellian.
And there it is. The first connection that ties Yulia Zatko to very real people, Richard and Marietta.
And then as we dug into who Richard Avazian and Marietta Tarabellian were, career criminals, career fraudsters.
And from there, the investigation takes off.
We find that additional money that was fraudulently obtained using the name Yulia Zatko was used to purchase watches. That takes us to the watchmaker.
But the watch dealer has never heard of Yulia Zatko.
I said, well, here's the day the money was transferred, here's the amount. They looked at their bank records, and the first thing they said was, oh, that's Richard.
The dealer reports that he is about to FedEx a watch to Richard, and on the day of the delivery, the FBI is waiting and watching.
This car shows up, and it's a Mercedes G-Class SUV, which we call it a G-Wagon. It's, it's a $100,000, $150,000 vehicle. You see this person get out, you're like, oh, I wonder if that's our guy.
The driver of the G-Wagon goes in and collects his package.
When we went to FedEx later and asked, well, who picked that up or what ID was presented, it was an ID for Richard Avazian.
And one more thing about that G-Wagon.
I checked the license plate, and that license plate comes back to Fiber One Media. Fiber One Media had applied for a number of different loans in the name of Victoria Kashko.
Meanwhile, back at the assembly line, frustration is mounting. Banks' fraud detectors are waking up.
So banks themselves have their own checks and balances and checks to make sure that fraudulent funds aren't coming in. So, for example, if your average balance is $3,000 a month and you suddenly have $300,000, that raises some red flags. And that's what's happening with all these accounts because they're getting so much money. They're a victim of their own success, and the money's getting stuck.
And Tammy and Richard are furious. In their minds, they are entitled to that money. They are the ones who stole it. In late September, Tammy sends off a text. "We need your help. This Capital One restricted the account that I finally opened." Richard answers, "Babe, going crazy. I have 5 accounts frozen from Chime. It's exhausting. It is time for a break." Up next, what not to take through U.S. Customs.
That's the definition of red-handed. That's getting caught red-handed.
Want more greed? Follow us on Instagram, connect on Facebook, and listen to the American Greed podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back. By October 2020, any hope of a quick ending to the pandemic has long faded.
This morning, COVID infections are climbing at an alarming rate in the U.S., now crossing the 9 million mark, with cases rising in nearly every state. The spread unrelenting.
But alongside countless stories of pain and suffering are stories of people responding to the pandemic in the most positive ways.
Now, Americans are creating new ways to help our nation's healthcare workers and first responders.
It's just a way that everybody can get involved and show some solidarity right now.
In South L.A., Marquise Harris Dawson joins that spirit, bringing people together to help each other. His idea? Giving money to restaurants to deliver meals to seniors who are fearful about leaving their homes. It's a lifesaver.
So many restaurants called us and said, you know, when we got the call from your office, we were already closing our books and preparing to close our bank accounts and shut down the business. This breathed life into our business.
Okay, we're going to put it in white bags.
Carrie Reese jumps at the chance to get Medear's operating again. She enlists her grandsons to help deliver the food. And they join an army of people across the country who stand in stark contrast to the deceit and greed of fraudsters exploiting the crisis. Like those in their dream house in Tarzana. While the pandemic rages outside their doors, Richard Avazian and Marietta Terabellian pack up their bags and their secret stash of COVID cash and head off to Turks and Caicos. From his chair on the beach, Richard texts Tammy a picture of his view and asks, "What's up, Tams? You up? I'm 3 hours ahead here." And even on vacation, the fraud business never stops.
And one of the things that he was doing while he was sitting on the beach was texting Tammy about how to use the money to purchase yet another house, yet another luxury home, using money that they had stolen from the American government and from the banks.
But trouble is waiting for Richard and Marietta back in the States. The FBI has asked Customs to look out for the fraudsters. And so in Miami, after border agents perform a secondary inspection of the Avazians' belongings, they call Justin Palmerton at the FBI.
And they said, "Hey, there's something going on here. You guys, like," he's like, "normally when we see what we've seen on these people, you guys come and arrest them immediately."
What are they seeing? Credit cards. Seriously incriminating credit cards. In the names of Yulia Zatko and Victoria Kaichko.
That's the definition of red-handed. That's getting caught red-handed.
The dream vacation is now a nightmare. Richard and Marietta are arrested. They are taken to the Broward County Jail. There, Marietta makes 2 phone calls. She is told it is a recorded line, but still she says what she should not say.
You know the charges.
Marietta Terabellian uses the phrase, "you know the charge." And the reason she uses that phrase is because she knows the charge. It reveals her state of mind. It reveals her consciousness of guilt.
And then she continues in Armenian.
Clean the house. She's not saying that because mom and dad are coming over for dinner. There's an intent behind that. That's someone who knows that she's done something wrong, and she knows they need to cover their tracks.
And now the FBI needs to move quickly. And so 2 weeks after the arrest in Miami, on the morning of November 5th, an FBI SWAT team makes its way up the long driveway to the Dream House. Above, FBI aerial surveillance catches something unusual.
In the back, you see Marietta come out with a bag of something. And she goes over to these bushes on the back side of the house, and you see her move the bushes aside and throw something in there.
An agent later walks by the bushes. He sees a bag filled with cash.
We poured it out. We did a quick count. It looked like what appeared to be $500,000, so about $500,000 in cash.
But it's at Tammy and Art's house that the most damning evidence is found.
We found the driver's licenses, credit cards, notary stamps, checks in the names of businesses that were used to obtain funds. The assembly line of fraud, as the prosecutors had coined it, was right there.
Up next, Richard and Marietta make a stunning decision.
I called LAPD. They went there, rang the doorbell. Nobody answered it. Nobody was there.
In November 2020, 12 days after the Dream House is searched, Richard Avazian, Marietta Terabellian, Artur Avazian, and Tammy Dadian are indicted on multiple counts, including bank and wire fraud. At the time, it is becoming increasingly clear that in their pursuit of easy COVID money, they are far from alone.
The fraudsters are bold, buying luxury cars, flights on private jets, mansions.
All bought by people who scam taxpayer money set aside for COVID relief.
Estimates start around $100 billion, with some stretching to $400 billion.
It's likely the largest fraud in American history.
And the federal government is working to track down every stolen dollar it can find.
We found one address in San Francisco that was used 1,300 times in applications for PPP loans. We saw a gas station whose telephone number was used 150 times.
And among the many COVID fraud cases the government is pursuing, the Avazians is one of the first COVID fraud cases to go to trial. The trial begins in the spring of 2021, and that is when the Avazians turn on each other.
At trial, the primary defense was that somebody else had done it. They pointed to the other members of the conspiracy to suggest that they were in fact the culprits.
Marietta's defense is that she is just a stay-at-home mom, not a participant in Richard's crimes. And Artur points the finger at Tammy, a wife he wants to divorce. Tammy pleads guilty, but says it was really Richard's scam.
And essentially what they formed was a circular firing squad.
But still, they are all found guilty on multiple charges. Immediately after the conviction, the government asks that Richard and Artur be placed in federal custody.
As the trial had demonstrated, they had the capability to flee because they had mastered the art of coming up with and using fake identities and also hiding money that they could then use to fund their escape.
The judge disagrees, and he releases Richard and Marietta with monitors strapped to their ankles. They return to their dream house to await sentencing. But getting caught for his crimes is never in Richard's plans.
I got a call from a probation officer who's watching Richard and said, "Hey, I just got a notification that Richard's ankle bracelet was cut off and I can't get a hold of him." I called LAPD. They went there, rang the doorbell. Nobody answered it. Nobody was there.
Richard and Marietta have disappeared, and they have left a note for their teenage children explaining why they will not find us home today. It is impossible not to be reminded of Richard's 2012 letter to the judge, in which he promised never to cause his family pain again. This time he writes that he has been working and sacrificing since the day they were born, but now he brings danger and fear to their lives.
In that letter they left to their children, Richard tries to justify it as if he had no choice. He had to leave. But he had a choice. Both himself and Marietta Terrebonne, they had a choice. They chose to commit fraud. They chose to steal money.
And for that, Richard is sentenced in absentia to 17 years in prison and Marietta to 6 years. Archer Avazian is sentenced to 5 years. Tammy to nearly 11. On the day she is scheduled to surrender to begin her sentence, Jeffrey Clark heads to the federal courthouse to wait for her.
So I'm at the third floor, I'm waiting and waiting. I called the probation person back, who indicated that she had called her several times and Tamara was not answering her phone.
She is last seen meeting with her lawyer in Beverly Hills. She leaves the building and simply disappears. She joins Richard and Marietta on the FBI's most wanted list. In all, the government finds that the Avazians make off with more than $17 million.
You were just kind of overwhelmed at, like, the brazenness of what they were doing, as well as the scope. You're like, man, why couldn't they just stop at just a couple million? How can people be so greedy?
For some, the answer to that question is as old as time.
Well, you know, in a crisis, most of us turn to each other, and there are some of us that turn on each other. I think that's as old as human beings surviving together, and this pandemic was no different.
The night does not announce itself as important. It never does. In California, in the summer of 1996, it arrives quietly, sliding over a suburban street where sprinklers tick and porch lights hum, where doors are locked more out of habit than fear. Somewhere after midnight, a sound cuts through the calm, not loud enough to wake the block, not sharp enough to trigger alarm, just a brief disruption in the rhythm of a place that believes it understands itself. By morning, that confidence will be gone, replaced by questions that have no clear edges and a phrase that will cling to the town for decades: cold case. The house sits still when police arrive, its windows dark, its driveway empty, its front door closed like nothing unusual ever crossed the threshold. Yellow tape goes up anyway, stretching from fence to fence, an artificial boundary that instantly transforms the familiar into the forbidden. Officers move with measured steps, radios murmuring low, eyes scanning for something that explains why a woman is missing from her own home. There are no broken locks, no smashed glass, no obvious signs of violence. What's missing is not furniture or valuables. What's missing is her, and that absence is louder than any crime scene chaos. Inside, the air feels wrong. A lamp is tipped at an odd angle. A chair slightly out of place. A glass on the counter, half full, untouched. These are not signs of struggle so much as signs of interruption, as if a normal night simply stopped mid-sentence. Detectives photograph everything, knowing that someday every inch of this room may be questioned, magnified, argued over. At the edges of the tape, neighbors gather, some still in pajamas, their faces tight with curiosity and concern. They whisper her name because everyone knows it. She is not a stranger. She is the woman who waved every morning, who talked about weather and errands, who fit neatly into the quiet pattern of the street. By sunrise, the neighborhood feels exposed. Police knock on doors, asking the same questions in the same calm voices. Did you hear anything? Did you see anything unusual? Did anything feel off? The answers are nearly identical. No, nothing. Just a normal night. That sameness is unsettling. Crimes like this are supposed to leave a mark, a scream, a shattered window, something that makes sense in hindsight. This one doesn't. It slips past notice, and that makes everyone uneasy. The local news arrives before lunch. Cameras angled carefully toward the house. Reporters speaking in urgent but controlled tones about a mysterious disappearance, and a community in shock. The words sound dramatic, but they don't feel exaggerated. Parents keep children inside. Neighbors cancel plans. Conversations stretch longer than usual, circling the same facts, the same speculations, trying to build a narrative where none exists yet. Police confirm little. They are looking into it. They are following leads. It is too early to say more. The lack of detail fuels imagination, and imagination is rarely kind. Search efforts begin quickly. Volunteers fan out into nearby fields and wooded patches, eyes scanning for anything out of place. Dogs follow scents that fade into nothing. A helicopter passes overhead, its steady thrum becoming the unofficial soundtrack of the day. Flyers appear on street corners and storefronts, her photograph copied again and again, a smile frozen in time, now carrying the unbearable weight of uncertainty. Each passing hour sharpens the fear everyone is trying not to name out loud. Within days, the language changes. Police stop saying missing and start saying investigation. Detectives expand their focus, mapping her routines, her relationships, her last known movements. A grocery store receipt places her out earlier that evening. A phone call ends without anything unusual noted. Friends describe her as careful, predictable, not the type to disappear voluntarily. Family members repeat the same sentence over and over. She wouldn't just leave. Each repetition sounds more desperate than the last. Attention turns inward, as it often does. Who knew her well? Who had access? Who was nearby that night? Trust becomes a liability, something to be examined rather than assumed. Neighbors are questioned again, this time more precisely. Timelines are drawn and redrawn. Small inconsistencies are noted, then set aside when they lead nowhere. One name appears frequently, not because of evidence, but because of presence. A man who lived close by, a familiar face, someone described as helpful, attentive, the kind of neighbor everyone relies on. Detectives note it because they note everything, but they also know better than to confuse familiarity with guilt. Weeks pass. The search is slow. The media attention drifts to newer stories. What remains is the grind of investigation, the slow accumulation of reports, interviews, lab requests. Evidence collected in those early days is sealed into bags and boxes, labeled with dates that will one day feel uncomfortably distant. Biological samples are preserved with care, even as technology limits what can be done with them. Detectives tell themselves it matters, that someday it might. For now, they work with what they have, and what they have is not enough. The term cold case is not used publicly at first. It appears quietly in paperwork, a classification that feels like a concession. When it finally reaches the community, it lands hard. Cold case sounds like an ending, even when officials insist it's not. It sounds like a door closing, like permission for the world to move on. The family refuses to accept it. They hold vigils. They speak to reporters. They mark birthdays and anniversaries with empty chairs and unanswered prayers. Their grief does not cool with the case. It sharpens. Years slide by. The house changes hands. New families move in, aware of the history, but distant from its emotional core. For longtime residents, the story becomes a reference point, something mentioned when discussing locks or late nights or how safe the neighborhood used to feel. Children who were young at the time grow up hearing about it as a warning, a reminder that bad things don't always announce themselves. The detectives who worked the case carry it quietly, an unresolved weight that surfaces when they least expect it. Inside the department, the file is revisited again and again. New eyes scan old photographs. Statements are reread with fresh skepticism. Technology advances, slowly at first, then faster. DNA analysis improves, promising answers that once seemed impossible. Samples from 1996 are sent to labs, tested and retested. Some yield nothing usable. Others produce partial results that don't match anyone in existing databases. Each attempt raises hope just enough to make the disappointment sting. The familiar neighbor remains a background presence in the file. Not accused, not cleared, just there. His statements are consistent. His life continues. From the outside, there is nothing remarkable about him, and that normalcy is unsettling in its own way. Investigators note how often he appeared in the early timeline, how readily he inserted himself into search efforts, how trusted he was by those around him. None of it breaks the law. None of it crosses the line into proof. In cold cases, intuition whispers, but evidence decides. As the calendar turns into the 2000s and then beyond, the case becomes a symbol of endurance rather than urgency. It lives in boxes, in databases, in the minds of a few determined people who refuse to let it dissolve completely. Periodically, a tip arrives, a memory jogged by time or guilt or a late-night television special. Each one is followed carefully, methodically, and each one eventually fades. The silence that follows is its own kind of answer, and it is never satisfying. By the time a new generation of investigators takes interest, the case is older than some of them. To these detectives, it is not just a tragedy. It is a puzzle built under different rules, using tools that no longer exist, assumptions that may no longer hold. They question everything. They challenge early conclusions. They digitize files and cross-reference details that once lived on paper alone. Patterns emerge slowly, cautiously, like images developing in a darkroom. For the community, the story remains unfinished. It surfaces in anniversary articles, in whispered conversations, in that uneasy pause when someone mentions the year 1996. The phrase California cold case carries a familiar chill, a reminder of how quickly certainty can evaporate. There's no closure yet, only the sense that something was taken and never returned, that the truth is still out there, buried beneath years of routine and forgetting. And as the evidence waits, preserved and patient, and as technology inches closer to unlocking secrets once thought unreachable, the case holds its position in time, neither resolved nor truly dormant. It lingers in that uncomfortable space between memory and possibility, a story that refuses to end, a silence that continues to ask the same question night after night, in a neighborhood that learned too late how fragile normal can be. Time does not heal a case like this. It stretches it. It thins it out until only the most stubborn questions remain, clinging to the edges of memory while everyday life presses forward. By the time the investigation enters its second decade, the file has become a quiet monument inside the department, thick with paper, heavy with intent, opened less often but never discarded. The woman's name still sits on the spine, printed in fading ink, and every time someone pulls it from the shelf, the room seems to grow a little quieter, as if the past itself is listening. The early momentum is gone now, replaced by a colder, more deliberate rhythm. Detectives assigned to the case no longer expect quick breakthroughs. They expect resistance. Evidence is no longer fresh. Witnesses are older, their memories softened by time, details blurring at the edges. Some have moved away. Some have died. Others swear they told police everything they knew back then, and maybe they did, but what they knew then may not be what they remember now. Time edits stories without asking permission. Re-interviews begin anyway. Doors are knocked on again, years after the first wave of questions. Some people are surprised. Others seem relieved, as if they've been waiting for someone to ask again. Old notebooks come out. Calendars are consulted. A few witnesses hesitate, then mention things they didn't think mattered before. A car parked at an odd angle. A light on later than usual. A conversation that felt strange in retrospect. Each detail is logged, weighed, compared against the old reports, and most of them lead nowhere, dissolving under scrutiny like mist. The physical evidence remains the case's silent backbone. Items collected in 1996 are unsealed and examined with techniques that didn't exist when they were first bagged. Fibers are reanalyzed. Trace materials are scanned for genetic material that once would have been invisible. Lab technicians work carefully, aware that this evidence has already waited long enough. Results come back slowly. Some confirm what detectives already knew. Others raise more questions than answers. Partial DNA profiles emerge, incomplete but tantalizing fragments of something that might one day connect. Still, databases are limited. The profiles don't match anyone on file. No alarms sound. No names appear on screens. The case remains unsolved, stubbornly resisting the tools meant to tame it. In the public eye, it drifts further into the background, resurfacing only when a reporter decides to revisit old mysteries, or when a true crime show needs a haunting story to fill an hour. Each retelling sharpens certain details and blurs others, reshaping the narrative in ways investigators quietly resent. Inside the department, frustration simmers beneath professionalism. Detectives debate theories that were once dismissed. They argue about early assumptions, about paths not taken, about whether the investigation focused too narrowly or too broadly in those critical first weeks. Hindsight is merciless. Everyone believes they would do things differently now. That belief does nothing to change what happened then. The trusted neighbor remains a point of unease. His proximity, his familiarity, his consistent presence in the early timeline make him impossible to ignore, even as years pass without charges. Investigators pull his file again, reviewing statements word by word, listening to old interview tapes, noting pauses, tone shifts, moments that feel rehearsed when heard with modern ears. They check his alibis once more, confirming details that once seemed solid. Everything still holds. Legally, there is no crack to pry open. He has aged along with the case. His hair grays. His routines change. He moves, but not far, staying within the same region, maintaining the same unremarkable profile. To neighbors, old and new, he is just another familiar face, someone who blends easily into the background. That ability to blend is exactly what troubles investigators most. They know that violence does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it hides behind politeness and routine. The victim's family lives in a different version of time. For them, the case never cools. It is present in every milestone, every holiday, every empty space where she should be. They push for updates, attend meetings, learn the language of law enforcement out of necessity. DNA, profiles, databases, limitations. Hope becomes something technical, dependent on advances in science rather than sudden confessions. They learn patience because there is no alternative. In the late 2000s, forensic genealogy begins to enter the conversation. Still experimental, still controversial, but promising a new path forward. The idea that distant relatives could unknowingly lead investigators to a suspect feels revolutionary. At first, it remains out of reach for this case. The DNA is too limited, the technology too new, funding too uncertain. The case waits again, suspended between possibility and practicality. Meanwhile, the community changes. New houses are built. Old landmarks disappear. People who remember the original shock grow quieter about it. Not because it hurts less, but because the world has given them fewer reasons to bring it up. The story becomes something you explain to newcomers, prefaced with phrases like years ago, and they never figured it out. Each telling reinforces the sense that some questions are permanent. Within law enforcement circles, the case gains a reputation. Not notorious, but persistent. The kind of file that refuses to be closed, resurfacing every few years when someone believes, once again, that now might be the moment. Younger detectives approach it with cautious optimism, unburdened by earlier disappointments. They see it as a test of modern methods, a chance to prove that time favors the patient. Older investigators watch them work with a mix of hope and skepticism. As technology advances, so does data sharing. Databases expand. Laws change. What once required local matches now reaches across states, across jurisdictions. Cold cases from the 1990s begin to fall, one by one. Headlines announcing arrests decades late, communities stunned by revelations that feel both shocking and inevitable. Each solved case sends a ripple through departments everywhere, a reminder that persistence can pay off. It also raises expectations, and expectations are dangerous things. Pressure builds quietly. Why not this case? Why not now? The evidence is there. The motive, whatever it was, remains buried. Investigators revisit the crime scene photos again, searching for overlooked details that might take on new meaning in light of modern understanding. A shadow in the corner of a frame. An object that seemed insignificant. Nothing leaps out, but the act of looking itself feels necessary, almost ritualistic. The trusted neighbor's life is mapped again, this time digitally, his employment history, travel records, social connections cross-referenced in ways that were impossible in 1996. Patterns emerge, subtle and inconclusive. There are gaps, but gaps exist in every life. Without something concrete, suspicion remains just that, a feeling without a handle. Then quietly something shifts. A lab report arrives with language that feels different, more precise, more confident. A new technique has managed to extract a clearer genetic profile from old evidence, still partial, but stronger than before. It is not enough to name someone. It is enough to search again. The profile is uploaded, compared, filtered. The process takes time. Weeks stretch into months. The anticipation kept deliberately small, controlled, guarded. No announcement is made. No one outside a tight circle knows this is happening. The family is told only that new testing is underway. They have learned not to ask for timelines. Hope, at this stage, is something you ration carefully. As results trickle in, they do not explode into clarity. Instead, they narrow the field, excluding some possibilities, raising quiet flags around others. The net tightens slowly, methodically. Each exclusion feels like progress, even when it brings no immediate answer. Detectives begin to sense that the case is changing shape, not solved but no longer static. The past starts to feel closer, not emotionally but structurally. The distance between 1996 and the present shrinks under the weight of new data. Conversations among investigators take on a different tone, less speculative, more focused. They speak carefully, aware that premature conclusions have doomed cases before. Still, there's a tension in the room that wasn't there a year ago, a sense that the silence might finally be preparing to break. Outside, the world continues as it always has. People drive past the old neighborhood without knowing its history. News stories dominate the news cycle. But somewhere in a lab, in a database, in a file that has waited far too long, the case stirs again, not loudly, not dramatically, but with purpose. The cold case is not solved. Not yet. But for the first time in years, it no longer feels frozen. It feels awake. The files sit on a shelf, the edges yellowed, corners bent from decades of handling. Every page tells the same story, yet each reading feels different. The year is now well into the 2010s, and the California 1996 cold case has outlasted careers, outlasted the initial frenzy of media attention, and outlasted the patience of a community that learned too early that absence carries its own weight. Detectives gather once more, not because they have answers, but because questions refuse to be silent. Every line of the report is scrutinized, every photograph inspected for details overlooked in the haste of the first days. Shadows cast by streetlights, fingerprints previously dismissed as background, fibers long considered irrelevant, all are now significant. The room hums with anticipation, quiet but electric, a tension that mirrors the community's collective heartbeat over decades. Technology has advanced in ways unimaginable in 1996. Digital databases allow investigators to cross-reference distant cases, to trace connections invisible to the human eye. DNA testing has reached a point where even the faintest fragment can be amplified, analyzed, and compared. The samples preserved all those years ago are fragile, degraded, their usefulness uncertain, but in the quiet hum of the lab, hope flickers. Every technician handling the evidence is aware that this could be the breakthrough. Every careful motion is a ritual, a plea that the past might finally speak clearly. The case itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for a signal it has long been denied. Detectives revisit the neighborhood where she lived. Streets are different now. New houses have replaced the old. Trees have grown taller, casting different shadows. Yet some things remain. The corner store where she bought groceries, the park where children once played, the street where she disappeared. Officers knock on doors, some belonging to original witnesses, others to residents who arrived later. Memories are imperfect, distorted by time. Some neighbors remember a car parked unusually, a figure seen in passing, a conversation that seemed odd in retrospect. Others are certain they saw nothing, heard nothing, suspected nothing. Each account is cataloged meticulously, every inconsistency noted, every partial recollection preserved, because in cold cases, even mistakes can point the way. The trusted neighbor remains a shadow in the investigation. His presence in the original timeline is undeniable. He helped with searches, comforted the family, volunteered information early on. In 1996, he was described as reliable, polite, unassuming. In 2010, investigators map his movements with precision, tracking his work history, social interactions, travel patterns. Nothing illegal appears on the surface. Yet the frequency of his involvement, his consistent proximity to the victim, demands scrutiny. Every statement he gave is compared with new witness accounts, every detail examined for discrepancies. He is not charged. He is not a suspect in the legal sense. Yet in the quiet corridors of detective work, his name cannot be ignored. The victim's family endures a different kind of passage. They mark anniversaries with muted grief, candles flickering in living rooms, photos displayed on mantels. Each year brings new pain and new hope. They track the investigation as closely as they are allowed, asking for updates, pressing for progress. DNA, profiles, genealogical research, these are the terms that define their hope. They have grown adept at understanding setbacks, at framing disappointment, at restraining the rising panic that follows each inconclusive test result. Time has not dulled their memory. It has sharpened it, engraving the absence into daily life. Tips continue to trickle in. Some are credible, others less so. A former acquaintance suddenly recalls a detail. An anonymous call mentions a car scene on a distant street. A message on a community forum raises an old theory. Each tip is evaluated, each lead pursued, and each returns, more often than not, to dead ends. Still, detectives maintain the rhythm of diligence, knowing that in cold cases, perseverance is a form of justice, even when it does not yield arrests. Small victories come in the form of exclusions, suspects ruled out, false leads clarified, the field narrowed, inch by inch, year by year. By 2015, forensic genealogy has matured. Techniques once controversial are now widely accepted. DNA from distant relatives can be matched against national databases to identify familial connections. Detectives revisit the preserved samples, extracting every molecule of genetic material possible. It is painstaking work, but the potential is undeniable. Partial profiles are uploaded, cross-referenced, analyzed. Each match, each close hit, is treated with cautious optimism. There is no guarantee, no certainty, only probability, and the patient hope of those who refuse to accept the silence. Investigators meet regularly to review the progress. Meetings are precise, methodical, restrained. Hypotheses are presented, debated, and tested against available evidence. No theory is dismissed lightly. The past is combed for connections overlooked, for assumptions that may no longer hold, for statements that take on new meaning in the context of modern understanding. The case is no longer just a file. It is a living puzzle, stretching across decades, defying closure, demanding attention from those willing to look where others have turned away. Within the lab, breakthroughs are incremental. A new test reveals a clearer profile than previously possible, but it is incomplete. Partial matches generate leads that are investigated with the care of the experienced. The trusted neighbor's DNA is compared, eliminated, reconfirmed. Other individuals connected by proximity or relationship are scrutinized. Investigators maintain a delicate balance, following the evidence without leaping to conclusions. Every misstep risks not only the case, but the fragile hope of a family waiting decades for answers. Community memory shapes the narrative outside the department. New residents hear fragments of the story. Media retrospectives revisit the disappearance, highlighting its unresolved status, framing it as a cautionary tale of trust and vulnerability. For those who lived through the original events, each retelling is a mix of relief and pain. The community has survived, but the absence remains. The story occupies a space in collective consciousness where clarity never fully arrives, where speculation thrives, and where the cold case label cements a permanent shadow over the neighborhood. Meanwhile, investigators consider patterns beyond the immediate case. Cases with similarities, unsolved crimes with comparable timelines, witnesses who appear across multiple investigations. Technology now allows a broader view, identifying correlations invisible to human perception. Each comparison yields data points, each point potentially a clue. Yet, despite all connections, no single lead definitively solves the mystery. The investigation remains a tightrope walk, balancing what is known against what is unknowable, every step cautious, every assumption tested. Family pressure remains persistent. They attend meetings, call investigators, meet with media representatives. They monitor developments with keen interest, noting advances in DNA technology, forensic methods, and law enforcement databases. Their vigilance is a silent force, ensuring the case does not fade into obscurity. Each year, each anniversary, is a reminder to the department that closure is not just an investigative goal. It is a moral imperative, a responsibility that stretches across time. The cold case has entered a new phase. What was once a file collecting dust is now an active research project. Detectives work alongside genealogists, data analysts, and forensic specialists. Every lead is examined with renewed intensity. Every piece of evidence reinterpreted through the lens of modern science. What was once impossible is now within reach. Yet, the case retains its haunting quality. The absence of the victim, the lack of definitive resolution, the unspoken suspicion surrounding familiar figures, all combine to maintain a tension that is both clinical and emotional, objective and human. Every day, the investigation moves incrementally. Leads are followed, databases searched, familial connections explored. No breakthrough is guaranteed, but progress is measured in subtle shifts. Exclusions, new theories, reanalyzed evidence, faint traces of DNA finally amplified enough to consider in context. Patience remains the most critical tool. Every step, however small, is a testament to persistence, to the refusal to allow decades of silence to define the narrative entirely. Detectives discuss strategies quietly, aware that the smallest detail can redefine the case. A footprint, a fiber, a casual remark once forgotten. All are considered anew. The passage of time has made the case more complex, but also richer in context. Patterns emerge where once there were only fragments. Relationships and movements are traced with greater accuracy. The neighborhood itself becomes a living map of memory and movement. Each street corner, each house, a potential key to unlocking what has remained hidden. Outside, life continues. The neighborhood is vibrant again, unaware of the decades-long attention devoted to its quiet streets. Children play, adults commute, and the normal rhythms of existence unfold as if oblivious to the shadow that lingers. Yet beneath that normalcy, the memory of the victim persists, a quiet echo, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, only waiting for the moment it can be confronted. The cold case is no longer merely historical. It is a puzzle actively seeking resolution, patient and unyielding, demanding the truth without yielding to the passage of years. The summer air in California carries a peculiar stillness as investigators return to the crime scene. Decades later, their presence almost ceremonial. The street is quieter now, lined with new constructions, trimmed lawns, and freshly painted doors, yet the house remains stoic, unchanged in its eerie familiarity. The porch light flickers in the late afternoon sun, shadows stretching long across the walkway, and detectives pause, almost instinctively, sensing the weight of the years that have passed. Inside, the rooms retain traces of the life once lived. The faint smell of old carpet, the subtle indentation in the couch where she sat, the dust gathering on surfaces long untouched. Each detail is cataloged again, photographed, documented, and cross-referenced with notes taken decades before. Time has softened the edges, but it has not erased the significance. The investigation has evolved. Where once reliance was on witness statements and circumstantial evidence, now forensic science offers new possibilities. DNA testing has become exponentially more sensitive, capable of identifying profiles from what previously would have been considered degraded or unusable samples. Hairs, fibers, fingerprints, fragments once dismissed, are analyzed with precision instruments capable of amplifying the smallest traces into actionable information. Laboratories hum with activity, technicians moving methodically, aware that every movement carries the potential to unlock a story left incomplete for over 20 years. The sense of urgency is quiet but palpable, attention threaded through every cautious observation. Detectives re-interview neighbors and witnesses, some original, others moved in later, creating a patchwork of perspectives layered over the events of 1996. Memories, inevitably distorted by time, offer both frustration and insight. A car parked at a peculiar angle that no one noted then. A fleeting conversation recalled suddenly, with vivid detail, a streetlight behaving unusually in the hours preceding the disappearance. Every recollection is meticulously logged, compared against old statements, and weighed for credibility. Discrepancies are neither dismissed nor fully trusted. They exist as potential threads in a tangled web that has resisted explanation for decades. Investigators navigate the precarious balance between memory and fact, intuition and evidence, aware that the smallest overlooked detail could provide the breakthrough long anticipated. The trusted neighbor remains a persistent figure in the narrative. His consistent presence, from the earliest days of the investigation, his willingness to assist, and his proximity to the victim compel attention. Law enforcement scrutinizes his past, reconstructing his life in painstaking detail. Employment records, travel logs, social interactions. No illegal activity surfaces. Yet, in the context of a cold case, the absence of guilt does not equate to irrelevance. Investigators review his original statements repeatedly, comparing them with new accounts, noting nuances in tone, hesitation, or emphasis. Each observation is carefully contextualized, contributing to a composite understanding rather than definitive accusation. The line between suspicion and certainty remains deliberately unblurred, preserving both the integrity of the investigation and the possibility of unforeseen revelations. The victim's family endures the unrelenting passage of time with a combination of resilience and anguish. Anniversaries are marked by quiet reflection, photographs arranged carefully on mantels, candles lit in memory. They track every new development, every potential lead, and every advance in forensic technology. DNA analysis, genealogical mapping, and database cross-references define their hope, and the pace of progress dictates their emotional rhythm. Each inconclusive test, each failed lead, becomes a measure of patience as much as frustration. Their lives are interwoven with the case, each decision and advancement echoing across the decades, reinforcing the enduring presence of absence in their daily existence. Throughout the early 2010s, forensic genealogy emerges as a tool with revolutionary potential. Once controversial, it now offers unprecedented avenues for investigation. Detectives revisit stored biological evidence, employing techniques capable of tracing distant familial connections. Partial DNA profiles, previously considered insufficient, are cross-referenced with genealogical databases. Each match, however tentative, generates cautious optimism. Investigators understand that probability, not certainty, drives these new possibilities. Every lead is verified meticulously, aware that the smallest miscalculation could compromise years of progress. Interdepartmental collaboration intensifies. Detectives work alongside forensic genealogists, data analysts, and lab technicians, combining expertise in a deliberate, synchronized effort. Hypotheses are rigorously tested, evidence reanalyzed, and new connections explored with methodical precision. Patterns previously invisible to the human eye become apparent, subtle alignments that suggest avenues worth pursuing. Yet, despite these advances, the case retains its intrinsic ambiguity. The victim's absence, the persistent shadow of suspicion, and the inconclusive nature of early evidence collectively maintain a tension that is both intellectual and visceral, blending procedural rigor with an almost cinematic sense of suspense. Community memory frames the case beyond the precinct. For new residents, it is a story learned through whispered histories and online retrospectives. For long-term neighbors, it is a cautionary tale, a narrative of trust violated and questions unanswered. Media coverage periodically revisits the disappearance, emphasizing its unresolved status, cementing the phrase cold case in local consciousness. Within these narratives, the case evolves into a symbol, a measure of vulnerability, and a reminder that the most ordinary streets can harbor enduring mysteries. The tension is not just procedural. It is societal, a reflection of collective unease that persists despite temporal distance. Investigators refine methodologies in the face of technological progress. Digital tools enable cross-referencing of patterns, movements, and behavioral indicators across jurisdictions, identifying correlations previously inaccessible. Each comparison contributes to a broader understanding of potential motives, opportunities, and relationships. While these data points offer insight, they are carefully weighed against human variables, memory, deception, and chance. The complexity of layering historical events with contemporary analysis requires patience, precision, and a disciplined avoidance of assumptions unsupported by evidence. Family involvement remains integral. They participate in periodic updates, advocate for continued attention, and monitor technological advancements that could impact the investigation. Their vigilance ensures that the case remains visible, counteracting the natural drift of institutional focus toward newer files. In this way, the passage of time does not diminish their engagement. It intensifies it, rendering them both stakeholders and custodians of the victim's enduring presence in collective memory. Their advocacy reinforces the moral dimension of the investigation, anchoring procedural rigor to human consequence. Incremental breakthroughs define this phase of the investigation. Partial DNA sequences are amplified and analyzed, narrowing potential familial matches. Each exclusion provides clarity. Each inclusion warrants careful scrutiny. Investigators move methodically, aware that every step, no matter how small, carries implications for the ultimate resolution. The case, once static and cold, becomes dynamically engaged with contemporary science, bridging decades of silence with technology-driven possibility. This approach underscores the principle that persistence, more than intuition, sustains long-term investigative success. Conversations among investigators shift in tone and substance. Discussions emphasize patterns, anomalies, and inconsistencies with unprecedented granularity. Evidence is contextualized within both historical and contemporary frameworks, blending human recollection with statistical analysis. Predictive modeling assists in hypothesizing potential scenarios, while laboratory results inform and constrain these hypotheses. Every line of inquiry is subject to iterative validation, a process that is as deliberate as it is exhaustive. The cold case, in this sense, is both a subject of study and a collaborator, revealing information only as methodical scrutiny allows. Neighborhood observations complement investigative efforts. Physical spaces are re-examined, environmental changes noted, and historical maps overlaid with contemporary layouts. Sightlines, travel paths, and social proximities are analyzed, establishing a lattice of relational data spanning decades. Observational insights, when paired with technological analysis, produce vectors of inquiry previously unattainable. Investigators maintain a delicate balance between empirical observation and inferential reasoning, recognizing that assumptions must be tempered with verifiable data. Despite technological and procedural advances, uncertainty persists. The victim remains absent, and conclusive identification of responsible parties is not yet achieved. The shadow of the trusted neighbor continues to hover, unresolved yet unavoidable. Investigators navigate the tension between evidence and speculation, constrained by legal standards, ethical considerations, and the limitations inherent in retrospective analysis. The case exemplifies the enduring complexity of cold cases, illustrating how time magnifies both the potential for discovery and the difficulty of certainty. Externally, societal memory frames the narrative. Media retrospectives, community storytelling, and digital archives perpetuate the unresolved nature of the case. Each retelling preserves elements of tension, ambiguity, and human consequence, reinforcing the persistence of absence in public consciousness. These narratives, while external to the procedural investigation, contribute to the broader context in which investigators operate, maintaining a cultural awareness of unresolved tragedy that shapes expectations and informs interpretive frameworks. Incremental advances continue to refine investigative focus. Leads are pursued with methodological rigor, historical records revisited, and cross-referencing across multiple data sets conducted systematically. Patterns emerge, subtle and often ambiguous, requiring careful interpretation. Each investigative decision reflects a synthesis of historical evidence, contemporary analytical capability, and ethical judgment, highlighting the multidimensional complexity of long-term cold case management. Detectives act with precision, cognizant that each movement carries potential ramifications for both procedural integrity and eventual resolution. The interplay of technological innovation, procedural diligence, and human memory defines this phase. Digital mapping, forensic genealogy, and enhanced analytical tools provide frameworks for understanding complex historical interactions. Witness recollections, previously peripheral, are integrated with data-driven insights to generate new investigative trajectories. Evidence, once dormant, is recontextualized within evolving scientific paradigms. The case, long static, begins to respond dynamically to the combination of human scrutiny and technological facilitation, illustrating how cold cases persist in a state of latent activity, awaiting the convergence of opportunity and capability. Within this matrix, the victim's absence remains central. Investigators, family, and community alike are tethered to the unresolved reality, experiencing a shared tension that bridges decades. The passage of time has amplified both the procedural challenges and the emotional stakes, creating an environment where every potential lead is magnified by context. As investigations continue, the delicate balance between patience and persistence, probability and certainty, defines the operational ethos, underscoring the enduring nature of cold cases as both investigative phenomena and human narratives. The investigation moves forward with deliberate caution. Every lead is assessed, every result validated, and every connection cross-referenced. Evidence is interpreted in light of both historical context and modern scientific understanding. The cold case, while unsolved, is not static. It evolves continuously through the intersection of human memory, technological advancement, and methodological precision. Each day, each analytical iteration brings the potential for new insight, a step closer to unraveling the decades-old mystery that has haunted the community, the family, and the investigators themselves, preserving the tension, suspense, and unresolved intrigue that define this enduring California cold case. The early morning air carries a chill, not from the season, but from memory, from the weight of decades that have passed since the California 1996 cold case first seized the community's attention. Streets that once bustled with neighbors heading to work are now quieter, more deliberate in their rhythm. Yet the memory of that night lingers, subtle and pervasive, like an echo trapped in the asphalt and concrete. Detectives return to the site, not to relive the trauma, but to uncover nuances long hidden, details that may have been overlooked in the chaos of the first frantic days. Every step taken across the worn sidewalks, every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light through a window is recorded, measured, compared against decades-old photographs and notes. Each observation forming a lattice of possibility that bridges past and present. Inside the house, traces of life before the disappearance remain almost tangible. The slight depression in the sofa where she used to sit, the faint outlines of furniture once shifted to accommodate comfort. A window slightly ajar despite protocols demanding it remain closed. Such details, once dismissed as mundane, are now interrogated meticulously. Investigators know that in a cold case, it is precisely the ordinary elements that often conceal extraordinary truth. Cameras click, notes are taken, shadows and light measured, and everything is documented with precision, knowing that the passage of time has not erased the potential significance of what was once overlooked. Forensic advancements have transformed investigative possibilities. DNA extraction techniques, once crude and limited, are now capable of analyzing minute samples, including degraded or partial biological material that previously yielded no usable information. Fibers, hair strands, latent prints, all are revisited, examined with high-resolution microscopy and genetic amplification. Every sample carries the weight of potential revelation, and lab technicians work with an almost reverent patience, aware that each molecule could bridge decades of silence. There is an energy, subdued yet electric, in the careful hum of laboratories as cold case evidence is coaxed into speech after years of dormancy. Witnesses and neighbors are re-engaged, some who remember the original events, others who have moved into the neighborhood with only fragmented knowledge of the case. Memory is a treacherous ally, shaped by the passage of time, yet every recollection is valuable. Someone recalls a car parked unusually, a figure seen lingering, or a conversation that seemed innocent at the time but now hints at subtle unease. Each recollection is carefully cross-referenced against old statements, identifying inconsistencies and corroborations. Investigators weigh these narratives, aware that what is dismissed as insignificant in one era can be crucial decades later. Patterns, once invisible, begin to emerge with the confluence of new testimony and technological capability. The trusted neighbor continues to occupy a shadowed position in the investigation. His proximity to the victim, his early involvement in searches, and the consistency of his statements demand careful scrutiny. Investigators analyze his life in granular detail: employment history, social networks, movements across time and space. While no legal culpability is identified, his role remains critical in understanding the context of the disappearance. Interviews are compared with contemporaneous records, subtle discrepancies noted, and behavioral cues examined under modern psychological frameworks. The balance between suspicion and evidence is delicate, requiring the investigative team to navigate ethical, legal, and logical parameters with exacting precision. Family members persist as central actors in the ongoing narrative. Their grief, meticulously chronicled in photographs, journals, and personal accounts, is both a reminder and a motivator. Anniversaries of her disappearance are marked with quiet ceremonies, candles illuminating photographs that have aged alongside their watchers. Their engagement with the investigation is sustained, rigorous, and emotionally taxing. They monitor forensic advancements, understand procedural limitations, and maintain contact with investigators, providing insights born of intimacy that professional scrutiny alone cannot replicate. Their involvement anchors the investigation in human consequence, ensuring the cold case remains a living story rather than a historical footnote. Tips continue to arrive sporadically. Some are vague recollections, others are leads generated by modern digital communities. Each is assessed critically, with resources allocated proportionally, acknowledging both the scarcity of actionable intelligence and the necessity of due diligence. Investigators navigate a landscape of partial truths and fragmented memory, seeking convergence points that may illuminate past obscurities. Even dead ends contribute indirectly, refining hypotheses, narrowing possibilities, and focusing attention where potential remains. Forensic genealogy has matured into a pivotal tool. Where traditional DNA analysis could only identify direct matches, genealogical methods allow the construction of extended family trees, tracing distant relatives to provide investigative leads. The previously preserved biological evidence is analyzed through these techniques, generating probabilistic relationships that guide further inquiries. Partial profiles, once considered inconclusive, now gain significance when cross-referenced against expansive databases. Every match, every hint of genetic connection is investigated thoroughly, methodically, and cautiously, as investigators know that premature conclusions carry the risk of both procedural and ethical missteps. Meetings within the investigative team are highly structured, balancing discussion of historical facts with integration of contemporary analytical methods. Hypotheses are rigorously debated, evidence re-examined in light of evolving forensic science. The iterative process seeks to synthesize decades of human observation, laboratory data, and technological analysis. Each decision is measured, acknowledging both the fragility of human memory and the imperfection of physical evidence. The case, once dormant, becomes a dynamic entity, responsive to modern tools yet inextricably shaped by its historical context. Community awareness continues to shape the cold case narrative externally. Media retrospectives, online forums, and local storytelling perpetuate the unresolved nature of the disappearance, embedding it into collective consciousness. For new residents, it serves as a historical curiosity. For long-term neighbors, a cautionary reminder. The term cold case becomes a cultural signifier, evoking unresolved tension, uncertainty, and vigilance. Investigators must navigate this external perception carefully, balancing transparency with procedural confidentiality and community interest with the integrity of the investigation. Investigative techniques integrate historical records with contemporary technology. Geographic data, travel logs, and social network analysis are applied to construct a comprehensive map of potential interactions, movements, and behavioral patterns. Observational data, both historical and contemporary, are synthesized with laboratory results to generate probable scenarios. Statistical modeling aids in prioritizing leads, while cross-referencing across multiple jurisdictions identifies correlations that might otherwise remain undetected. The approach is multidimensional, blending empirical observation, historical reconstruction, and predictive analysis to guide investigative action. Despite advances, uncertainty persists. The victim remains missing, and the identification of responsible parties is unresolved. The trusted neighbor's proximity remains a point of tension, unresolved in terms of legal culpability, but relevant in narrative construction. Investigators confront the duality of cold cases, the coexistence of progress and impasse, the simultaneous presence of hope and ambiguity. Each breakthrough, each analytical insight, must be balanced against decades of incomplete information, the fragility of memory, and the limits of forensic certainty. Incremental progress defines this phase of investigation. DNA exclusions narrow potential familial connections. Partial leads are investigated, and evidence is reinterpreted in light of technological advancements. Every successful exclusion, though minor, represents a form of progress, redirecting focus and refining investigative strategy. The case, long considered static, is now active in multiple dimensions: procedural, analytical, and emotional. Persistence, patience, and methodical rigor remain central to navigating decades of silence and uncertainty. Interactions among investigators emphasize integration of disciplines. Behavioral analysis, genealogical research, forensic laboratory work, and historical reconstruction are coordinated in a unified framework. Each element informs the others, producing a composite understanding that exceeds the sum of its parts. Analytical precision is paramount. Hypotheses are continuously evaluated against the totality of evidence, ensuring that investigative momentum remains grounded in empirical and methodological rigor. The cold case evolves not as a linear narrative, but as a multi-threaded investigation, dynamically responsive to the confluence of historical and contemporary insight. The community, family, and investigative team share a temporal connection through absence. Decades of unresolved questions maintain a tension that bridges past and present. Each investigative action resonates beyond the laboratory, the office, or the field, affecting family perceptions, community narratives, and institutional memory. The cold case is simultaneously a procedural endeavor and a human story. Its persistence a testament to both enduring mystery and sustained dedication. Time has transformed it from an immediate crisis into an enduring puzzle, one that continues to command attention, patience, and meticulous scrutiny. Within the lab, every specimen is handled with renewed care. DNA fragments are amplified, analyzed, and reanalyzed. Fibers, previously discounted, are examined for potential transfer pathways. Partial profiles are cross-referenced against national and international databases. Analysts apply contemporary statistical models to assess match probabilities, integrating these results with historical context. The aim is not to force resolution prematurely, but to allow the evidence to guide investigative action. Cold case methodology, now augmented by technological innovation, facilitates a convergence of historical patience and modern capability, providing avenues for potential breakthrough that were unimaginable at the case's inception. As the investigation advances, each day represents a convergence of old and new, of memory and data, of human intuition and analytical precision. Leads are pursued with methodological rigor, evidence interpreted with caution, and patterns assessed with both historical and contemporary understanding. The California 1996 cold case, long dormant yet never forgotten, operates as a nexus where decades of uncertainty, forensic innovation, and human perseverance intersect, sustaining the suspense, tension, and unresolved intrigue that define its enduring presence in investigative, familial, and communal consciousness. The dawn light filters through the trees lining the quiet California street, illuminating the house as if to highlight its permanence, its silence, and the decades-long mystery contained within. Inside, dust motes drift in the sunbeams, settling over objects that have remained untouched for years, each one a potential clue, each one a fragment of a life abruptly interrupted. Detectives move with careful deliberation, aware that even the smallest overlooked detail could now yield answers. The case has been cold for over 20 years, but the combination of modern technology, renewed investigative focus, and persistent determination has shifted the investigation from stasis to cautious momentum. The house, once simply a setting for disappearance, has become a laboratory of memory and forensic possibility. Advances in forensic analysis have transformed the approach to evidence. Previously unremarkable fibers are re-examined with high-resolution microscopes. DNA traces, once insufficient for profiling, are amplified and compared against expansive national and international databases. Hair, skin cells, and microscopic residues are analyzed using methods unimaginable in 1996. Each discovery is treated with meticulous care, as if the years themselves demand reverence. Technicians know that the smallest fragment could unlock decades of silence. The laboratory, humming quietly with machines, becomes a conduit through which the past whispers, offering partial revelations and tantalizing possibilities. Witnesses, both original and new, are consulted again. Memories are imperfect, distorted by time, yet every account is critical. A neighbor recalls an unusual car parked overnight. Another remembers an indistinct conversation, seemingly trivial then, now resonant with potential significance. Each recollection is cross-referenced with older statements, revealing subtle discrepancies and corroborations. Investigators tread carefully, recognizing that human memory is both a tool and a trap. It offers insight, but is vulnerable to suggestion, decay, and reinterpretation. Patterns begin to emerge when fragments align across decades, illuminating pathways previously invisible. The trusted neighbor remains central to the investigation. His involvement in the initial response, his proximity to the victim, and his consistent presence in witness narratives demand careful scrutiny. Investigators reconstruct his life, employment, travel, social interactions, and potential opportunities. No criminal activity surfaces, yet his consistent presence cannot be ignored. Behavioral analysis examines his statements, tone, and demeanor, searching for subtleties unnoticed in prior interviews. The line between suspicion and evidence is maintained with deliberate caution, balancing procedural integrity with the need to follow every investigative lead. The victim's family continues to bear the weight of unresolved grief. Anniversaries are marked quietly, photographs preserved, candles lit in remembrance. Their engagement with the investigation is constant, monitoring progress in forensic techniques, genealogical analysis, and investigative strategy. They navigate the tension between hope and frustration, understanding that time has both complicated the case and offered new avenues for discovery. Their persistence ensures the case remains a priority, anchoring the investigation in human consequence as investigators pursue the technical dimensions of resolution. Tips and leads trickle in intermittently. Some offer minor clarifications, others suggest new avenues. Every lead is carefully evaluated and prioritized. Investigators navigate a landscape where information is partial, sometimes contradictory, but never irrelevant. Even seemingly minor details can shift the trajectory of the case when interpreted alongside historical evidence and modern forensic data. Each investigative decision is tempered by the recognition that decades of elapsed time have altered contexts, obscured recollections, and complicated relationships. Forensic genealogy has emerged as a pivotal tool. DNA samples previously considered insufficient are now cross-referenced with genealogical databases to identify distant familial relationships. Partial profiles gain significance when aligned with these extended connections, providing leads that were once unattainable. Each potential match is pursued cautiously, respecting ethical and legal frameworks. The investigative team operates with a synthesis of traditional detective work and cutting-edge scientific methodology, merging intuition, persistence, and technology in pursuit of resolution. Regular meetings within the investigative team are structured, analytical, and collaborative. Hypotheses are rigorously debated. Evidence is re-examined in light of modern techniques. Patterns, anomalies, and correlations are explored in depth. The integration of historical records with contemporary analysis produces a dynamic understanding of the case. Investigators apply a disciplined approach, ensuring that conclusions are grounded in verified evidence rather than assumption or speculation. The case evolves, no longer static, yet remains imbued with the tension inherent in unresolved mystery. Community perception continues to frame the narrative externally. Media retrospectives, online discussions, and local storytelling perpetuate awareness of the unresolved disappearance, embedding the phrase cold case into public consciousness. For long-term residents, the case is a cautionary memory. For newcomers, an enigmatic history. Investigators must balance transparency with confidentiality, providing insight without compromising the integrity of ongoing work. The cultural persistence of the cold case contributes to both public interest and investigative vigilance, maintaining a shared sense of tension and accountability. Investigative methodology incorporates historical and contemporary perspectives. Geographic mapping, social network analysis, and behavioral profiling are employed to reconstruct potential interactions and opportunities. Patterns emerge from cross-referencing decades of movement, relationships, and observational data. Statistical modeling assists in evaluating probability, guiding investigative focus. Evidence is continuously reevaluated, with each new insight informing subsequent decisions. The cold case operates as a living, adaptive system, responsive to cumulative information and analytical refinement. Uncertainty remains an inescapable reality. The victim is still missing, and definitive identification of responsible parties remains unresolved. The trusted neighbor's role persists as a point of narrative tension, legally innocent, yet central to reconstructing context. Investigators navigate the duality inherent in cold cases, balancing methodical patience with the necessity of action. Progress occurs incrementally, with every partial insight, exclusion, and analytic result representing a measured advancement toward clarity. Incremental breakthroughs define this stage. DNA profiles, partial and now amplified, are compared with genealogical databases. Exclusions narrow investigative focus, while potential matches generate new lines of inquiry. Analytical rigor is applied to every finding, integrating scientific, historical, and behavioral insights. Investigators maintain methodical discipline, aware that small, cumulative progress is preferable to rushed conclusions. The case, once dormant, is now actively engaged, blending decades of evidence with contemporary capability. Investigative collaboration emphasizes integration across disciplines. Forensic specialists, genealogists, behavioral analysts, and field detectives work in concert, synthesizing insights from multiple perspectives. Each lead is evaluated through empirical evidence, historical context, and contemporary interpretation. Hypotheses are tested iteratively, ensuring robustness of conclusion. The cold case, in this framework, functions as a complex system in which disparate data points converge, yielding patterns that inform strategic decisions. The victim's absence remains a central force in the case's persistence. Decades of unresolved questions maintain psychological and procedural tension among investigators, family members, and the community. Every investigative action resonates beyond the immediate procedural context, influencing family perceptions, community awareness, and institutional memory. The case exemplifies the enduring interplay of human emotion, technological advancement, and methodological rigor, illustrating the multidimensional nature of long-term cold case investigation. Laboratory processes continue with meticulous precision. Biological samples are amplified, analyzed, and reanalyzed. Fibers, hairs, and microscopic residues are scrutinized under advanced instrumentation. Partial DNA sequences are assessed for familial connections, incorporating probabilistic analysis. Every analytic result is contextualized within both historical and contemporary frameworks. The cold case, long dormant, engages dynamically with ongoing scientific methodology, translating years of stasis into actionable insight, while preserving the integrity of investigative judgment. Each day in the investigation represents convergence of historical memory, forensic innovation, and human persistence. Leads are pursued, evidence interpreted, and patterns assessed against multiple dimensions of knowledge. The case, dormant for decades, yet never abandoned, is a nexus where uncertainty, technological capability, and investigative perseverance intersect. Its persistence ensures that tension, suspense, and unresolved intrigue endure, maintaining the California 1996 cold case as an emblem of both enduring mystery and the relentless pursuit of truth. The California sun beats down on the quiet neighborhood streets, deceptively ordinary, betraying no hint of the decades-long mystery that lingers in their shadows. The house where she vanished stands as a silent witness, unchanged yet forever marked by absence. Investigators return, their footsteps echoing softly across the sidewalks, each creak and shift in the floorboards inside carrying the weight of time. The case, unresolved for over 20 years, has become a complex lattice of memories, evidence, and evolving forensic methodology. Each detail, whether a faint scratch on a windowsill, a misplaced object, or the lingering scent of a home once vibrant with life, is scrutinized anew, interpreted through the lens of contemporary science and seasoned intuition. The advances in forensic analysis have revolutionized the approach to cold cases like this. DNA, once limited to high-quality samples, can now be extracted from degraded biological material, amplified, and sequenced with precision. Fibers that were dismissed decades ago are re-examined under high-resolution microscopes, revealing patterns and connections previously invisible. Hair, trace residues, and latent prints undergo rigorous testing, providing fragments of identity that might finally converge to produce actionable leads. Laboratory technicians handle each sample with the reverence of caretakers, conscious that each molecule could unlock decades of silence. The hum of machinery becomes a backdrop to the invisible conversation between the past and the present. Witness interviews are revisited, blending historical recollections with modern investigative questioning. Original neighbors, who were present during the early days of the disappearance, are complemented by more recent residents who have absorbed fragments of the story through community memory. Recollections are cross-referenced meticulously, discrepancies noted, corroborations amplified. A car parked at an unusual angle, a fleeting figure observed near the victim's home, a conversation that seemed trivial at the time. All are re-examined for latent significance. Investigators navigate the precarious terrain of memory, understanding that even distorted recollections can point toward truth when aligned with other evidence. The trusted neighbor remains a focal point, not necessarily as a suspect, but as a critical figure in reconstructing the context of the disappearance. His proximity, prior involvement in searches, and interactions with both the victim and community members warrant careful scrutiny. Investigators reconstruct his timeline with painstaking detail: employment records, travel logs, social networks. Each statement he gave is analyzed, tone, hesitation, and choice of words compared against contemporary behavioral frameworks. Legal culpability remains unproven, yet understanding his role is essential to mapping the intricate web surrounding the case. Family members remain the emotional center of the ongoing investigation. Their grief is both enduring and methodical. They commemorate anniversaries quietly, maintaining photographs, journals, and memorials that document both memory and absence. Their involvement extends to active monitoring of forensic progress, genealogical research, and investigative strategy. They have learned to navigate the tension between hope and frustration, their vigilance ensuring the case remains alive within the system. Their presence underscores the human consequence of procedural diligence and provides an anchor for the emotional weight that investigators cannot overlook. Tips and leads continue to surface sporadically. Some are minor, others suggest entirely new avenues for investigation. Each is evaluated critically, resources allocated appropriately, and potential significance assessed. Investigators operate in a landscape where information is fragmented, sometimes contradictory, but never irrelevant. Even failed leads refine understanding, narrowing focus and directing attention toward more promising lines of inquiry. This process requires patience, discipline, and a rigorous methodology to ensure that progress is measured and meaningful. Forensic genealogy has emerged as a cornerstone of cold case investigation. DNA samples, once deemed insufficient, are now analyzed to establish distant familial connections through national and international genealogical databases. Partial DNA profiles, previously considered inconclusive, now generate leads that were once unattainable. Investigators pursue each potential match with meticulous care, adhering to ethical guidelines while integrating scientific insight. The synthesis of traditional detective work with modern forensic innovation creates a multidimensional approach capable of bridging decades of unresolved silence. Team meetings have become precise, analytical exercises. Evidence is reviewed, hypotheses debated, and investigative priorities adjusted based on the integration of historical records with contemporary scientific data. Patterns, anomalies, and correlations are explored exhaustively, producing a comprehensive understanding that guides subsequent action. Methodical rigor ensures that conclusions are evidence-based rather than speculative. The case, long dormant, now operates as a dynamic system, responsive to investigative refinement while preserving the integrity of historical context. Community perception continues to shape external narratives of the case. Media coverage, online forums, and oral histories embed the disappearance into the collective consciousness, perpetuating the cold case's presence in both local and broader contexts. New residents encounter it as a mysterious fragment of neighborhood history, while long-term residents perceive it as a cautionary tale and unresolved tragedy. Investigators manage public awareness carefully, balancing transparency with the need to protect procedural integrity. The enduring cultural resonance of the case reinforces both community vigilance and investigative accountability. Investigative methodology now incorporates advanced technological frameworks alongside human observation. Geographic analysis, social network mapping, and behavioral profiling reconstruct interactions and movements over time. Patterns emerge from cross-referencing historical data with contemporary insights. Predictive modeling and statistical analysis guide prioritization of leads, while physical evidence is continually reinterpreted within both modern and historical frameworks. The cold case functions as a living investigative system, dynamically adapting to new data, discoveries, and interpretations. Despite advances, uncertainty persists. The victim remains missing, and definitive identification of those responsible is not yet achieved. The trusted neighbor's involvement, while legally inconclusive, continues to inform the broader understanding of context and opportunity. Investigators navigate the tension between procedural patience and actionable insight, balancing thorough analysis with the need to maintain momentum. Cold cases inherently occupy this duality, existing simultaneously in states of progress and impasse. Incremental progress characterizes the current phase. Amplified DNA profiles are cross-referenced against genealogical databases, exclusions narrow the investigative field, and potential leads generate further avenues for inquiry. Each analytic result is integrated with historical knowledge, behavioral observation, and technological data. Investigators maintain methodical discipline, understanding that cumulative minor advancements often yield the breakthroughs long sought. The case, once static, is now active, intersecting evidence, memory, and analytic precision in a delicate equilibrium. Collaboration across disciplines is central to contemporary strategy. Behavioral analysts, forensic genealogists, laboratory technicians, and field detectives operate in coordinated frameworks. Insights from each domain inform broader understanding, enabling iterative testing of hypotheses and validation of findings. Evidence is continually reassessed against historical context and modern analytical results. The cold case evolves as a multidimensional investigation, its trajectory shaped by the convergence of diverse expertise, cumulative data, and careful interpretation. The absence of the victim remains the core of the case's persistence. Investigators, family members, and the broader community remain bound to unresolved questions that span decades. Each action, from laboratory testing to field investigation, resonates beyond immediate procedural outcomes, influencing emotional responses, communal memory, and institutional attention. The case exemplifies the complex interplay between human emotion, technological advancement, and methodological rigor, illustrating the enduring nature of long-term cold case investigations. Laboratory processes continue with meticulous precision. Biological materials are amplified, fibers and hairs examined under high-powered instruments, and partial DNA sequences evaluated probabilistically for familial connections. Each finding is contextualized historically and contemporarily. The case, long dormant, engages dynamically with modern investigative methods, translating decades of silence into actionable insights while preserving investigative integrity. Every analytic step builds on previous work, contributing to a cumulative framework capable of producing resolution when convergence occurs. Every day in the investigation represents a convergence of historical record, scientific advancement, and human persistence. Leads are pursued, evidence interpreted, patterns analyzed across temporal layers. The California 1996 cold case, dormant yet alive, serves as a nexus where uncertainty, innovation, and diligence intersect. Its endurance preserves suspense, tension, and unresolved intrigue, maintaining both investigative focus and communal awareness. Persistence, methodical rigor, and integration of human and technological insight sustain the investigation, ensuring that, despite the passage of decades, the case continues its slow but determined movement toward potential resolution. The neighborhood seems ordinary in the afternoon sun, the calm streets belying the weight of a mystery that has stretched over decades. The house at the center of the California 1996 cold case sits quietly, its walls unchanged but echoing with the absence that has haunted family, neighbors, and investigators alike. Inside, every detail is re-examined. The furniture's faint impressions, dust settled and patterns undisturbed, the subtle traces left by a life abruptly halted. For detectives, the home is both a crime scene and a time capsule, where past and present converge, demanding scrutiny of the smallest fragment. Shadows fall differently now, yet the questions cast by that night remain as pressing as ever, and investigators move through the rooms with deliberate care, aware that decades of overlooked details may finally reveal the truth. Forensic science has transformed the way investigators approach evidence. DNA, once limited to high-quality samples, can now be amplified from degraded materials, revealing identities previously obscured. Fibers, hairs, and trace residues are reanalyzed with high-resolution tools, exposing connections that were invisible during the initial investigation. Each sample is treated with almost ritualistic attention, recognizing that even the smallest fragment could resolve years of silence. Laboratories hum with controlled intensity, machines meticulously parsing molecules that may carry the key to long-sought answers. In this delicate balance of patience and precision, the past begins to communicate, quietly yet insistently, through the evidence it has preserved. Witnesses, both those present at the time and newer residents of the area, are consulted again. Memories, imperfect yet valuable, are cross-checked, evaluated, and contextualized. A car parked unusually on a street once considered ordinary, a fleeting figure glimpsed in the wrong place at the wrong time, a conversation once dismissed as mundane, all are revisited for potential significance. Investigators must navigate the fragility of memory. What was forgotten or misremembered can contain vital clues when considered alongside other accounts. The alignment of partial recollections begins to form patterns, revealing interactions and movements previously invisible and slowly narrowing the circle of possibility. The trusted neighbor continues to occupy a complex role in the investigation. His proximity, consistent involvement in the initial search efforts, and recurring presence in witness narratives make him a focal point, not necessarily as a suspect, but as a critical figure in understanding context and opportunity. Investigators reconstruct his daily routines, social interactions, and professional history with painstaking detail. Statements made decades ago are examined for subtleties of tone, hesitation, and emphasis, analyzed through contemporary behavioral frameworks. While legal culpability has not been established, understanding his presence is essential to forming a coherent narrative of events surrounding the disappearance. Family members remain an emotional anchor. They commemorate anniversaries quietly, maintain photographs and journals, and actively monitor advances in forensic and genealogical science. Their persistence bridges the gap between institutional process and human experience, ensuring the case remains a priority. They endure cycles of hope and frustration, learning to navigate inconclusive tests and partial leads, and their vigilance reinforces the moral imperative behind the investigative effort. The personal stakes elevate procedural diligence, reminding investigators that every action carries human consequence. Tips and leads continue to arrive sporadically. Some offer minor clarifications. Others suggest entirely new avenues for exploration. Investigators evaluate each critically, balancing limited resources against the potential for breakthrough. In the landscape of partial and sometimes contradictory information, every detail is considered, knowing that even seemingly insignificant observations can illuminate previously invisible connections. The careful pursuit of leads transforms fragments of memory and observation into a structured investigative pathway. Forensic genealogy has become a central tool in resolving cold cases. DNA samples, once considered insufficient, are now leveraged to identify distant familial relationships through national and international databases. Partial profiles gain renewed significance, offering potential leads that would have been unattainable 20 years prior. Investigators pursue each potential match with rigor, integrating genealogical insights with behavioral and situational analysis, all within the bounds of ethical and legal frameworks. The combination of modern forensic innovation with traditional detective work allows the case to evolve dynamically, bridging decades of silence with tangible investigative pathways. Internal team meetings have shifted to emphasize analytical precision and collaborative integration. Historical evidence is reassessed, forensic data reviewed, and hypotheses debated with exacting attention. Patterns, anomalies, and correlations are scrutinized across multiple dimensions, producing a comprehensive understanding that informs investigative strategy. Every decision is evidence-based, minimizing reliance on conjecture. The cold case, once static, has become a dynamic system, responsive to cumulative information while retaining the integrity of historical context. Public perception continues to influence the narrative. Media retrospectives, online discussions, and oral histories sustain awareness of the unresolved disappearance, embedding it into collective memory. New residents encounter it as an enigmatic piece of local history. Long-term residents perceive it as an unresolved tragedy. Investigators manage transparency carefully, balancing the need for public engagement with the necessity of preserving investigative integrity. Cultural awareness of the cold case reinforces community vigilance and contributes to the broader context in which investigative decisions are made. Methodology now integrates historical and contemporary data. Geographic analysis, social network mapping, and behavioral profiling reconstruct interactions, movements, and relational dynamics over time. Patterns emerge from cross-referencing decades of records, creating a framework for evaluating probability and prioritizing leads. Predictive modeling and statistical analysis supplement empirical observation, guiding investigators toward the most promising avenues while ensuring adherence to evidentiary standards. The cold case operates as a complex, adaptive system, continuously refined through the interplay of data, observation, and human judgment. Uncertainty remains inherent. The victim's absence persists, and definitive identification of responsible parties has yet to be achieved. The trusted neighbor's involvement, while not legally incriminating, continues to shape the understanding of opportunity and context. Investigators navigate the duality of progress and impasse, balancing methodical patience with actionable insight. Cold cases exist in this liminal space, suspended between decades of unanswered questions and the possibility of resolution through persistent effort and evolving technology. Incremental progress defines this phase. DNA sequences are amplified and analyzed, generating potential familial connections. Exclusions narrow the investigative field, while promising leads expand inquiry. Analytic rigor ensures that every result is contextualized against historical and contemporary evidence. Small, cumulative steps produce meaningful advancement, illustrating that even in prolonged cases, persistence and methodical attention can yield tangible results. The case, once dormant, is now actively engaged across multiple investigative dimensions, blending evidence, memory, and technological insight. Cross-disciplinary collaboration is essential. Behavioral analysts, forensic genealogists, laboratory technicians, and field investigators operate in integrated frameworks. Insights from each domain inform broader understanding, enabling iterative hypothesis testing and evidence validation. Historical data and modern analysis converge, producing actionable patterns while maintaining investigative integrity. The cold case functions as a multi-layered investigation, its trajectory guided by the confluence of expertise, technology, and accumulated knowledge. The victim's absence remains the emotional and procedural center. Investigators, family members, and the community are bound to unresolved questions spanning decades. Each investigative action resonates beyond immediate procedural outcomes, affecting family perception, community memory, and institutional attention. The case embodies the interplay between human emotion, technological capability, and methodical rigor, demonstrating the enduring complexity of long-term cold case resolution. Laboratory work continues with meticulous attention. Biological materials are amplified, fibers and hairs scrutinized, and partial DNA sequences evaluated for probabilistic familial connections. Analytic findings are contextualized historically and contemporaneously, enabling dynamic engagement with evidence. The cold case, dormant for decades, now operates as a responsive system, translating silence into potential clarity through the integration of advanced forensic methodology, rigorous procedure, and accumulated historical knowledge. Each day represents a convergence of memory, science, and persistence. Leads are pursued, evidence interpreted, and patterns analyzed across temporal and spatial dimensions. The California 1996 cold case, long unresolved yet actively investigated, exemplifies the intersection of uncertainty, innovation, and dedication. Its endurance sustains suspense, tension, and investigative focus, preserving the unresolved mystery while fostering the incremental progress necessary to approach eventual resolution. Persistence, methodical rigor, and the integration of human insight with technological advancement maintain the delicate balance required to navigate a case defined by decades of unanswered questions, haunting absence, and the enduring pursuit of truth. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the quiet California street, and the house at the center of the 1996 cold case stands as both witness and enigma, unchanged yet heavy with the weight of decades. Investigators tread carefully through familiar spaces, mindful that even the smallest overlooked detail could now reveal answers long hidden. Dust covers surfaces that were once mundane, a faint indentation in a couch where she sat, a door slightly ajar, a scuff on the floor. Each fragment is measured, photographed, and analyzed as if the house itself were speaking in whispers. The case, cold for more than 20 years, now moves with a cautious momentum born of modern forensic advancements, meticulous review of historical evidence, and the tireless persistence of those who refuse to let it fade into obscurity. Technological innovation has transformed the possibilities of forensic investigation. DNA extraction from previously unusable or degraded samples allows the reconstruction of partial profiles, amplified to